Well, thank you everyone for coming to this incredibly important session. My name is Reid Purvis. I'm from Microsoft and a track owner for data center and infrastructure management. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you Veeam, a fantastic partner. Microsoft is here to have a great experience with partners. You know, we have a lot of customer data, and there are exabytes of data to be involved with our cloud capability. Veeam is a partner that can help you, have that come into some of the Microsoft, take advantage of some of the services that we offer, and help you get the availability for your capabilities on premises, but also into Azure. And so, with that, I'd like to introduce Clint Wyckoff from Veeam, and take it away. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Reid. I really appreciate it.
Put that down.
Okay, yeah. We'll just set this down over here. Thanks for the introduction. Did anybody notice? Reid actually deserves a golden star for the day. Does anybody know why? Because he said premises. How many times have we been at this conference and you hear people say it incorrectly? It's on premises, not on premise, right? So, golden star for Reid. But anyways, thanks so much for coming out to join us here at Ignite. We really appreciate your time. And for those folks that are viewing this on Channel 9 afterwards, thanks for taking a few minutes to check out the session. So the purpose of today's discussion is to highlight a lot of the capabilities that Veeam has today inside of the on-prem data center, as well as how we're leveraging core Microsoft capabilities inside of Hyper-V 2016, as well as enabling you to further your business out to Microsoft Azure. So that's the purpose of today's discussion. There's some slides, obviously. My marketing folks would get really mad at me if I just did all demo. So there are some slides, but I promise you that I do have some live demo, literally 100% live for you guys here after we just go through some slides, kind of set the stage for you. So, before I jump into things, how many people in here have heard of Veeam software before? Okay, awesome. How many people in here are current customers of Veeam? Several of you, yes? Okay, that's really good showing. So, Veeam, whoops, I don't know why it goes on like that. But Veeam is a global organization. We have employees worldwide. We have over 230,000 paying customers. And it's really exciting for me because just a few years ago, I've been with Veeam now for 4 years, okay? And before I joined Veeam, I was a customer of Veeam. So it's fun to have been working with the product since, 2010 to see it grow and advance and evolve into what it is today. So, it's really fun to be a part of that. So you can see here the coolest number on this entire slide, however, that really sticks out to me is this 13.3 million virtual machines in 180 countries worldwide. So that really points and paints a really good picture because, as I mentioned, Veeam is a global company, but also virtualization as a whole is 100% main stage. So organizations of all shapes and sizes, from small, medium business to Joe's bait and tackle shop to somebody probably in the most remote portions of the world, are leveraging virtualization. And kind of the key players there are Hyper-V as well as VMware. And that's really where Veeam has kind of made its mark in the market as being the #1 virtual machine backup. But as you'll see throughout the course of the discussion today, things have evolved, things have changed. Virtualization on-prem, traditional, isn't kind of the only player out there, right? So kind of the way that our vision, and that's what I'm going to share with you here, is, as I mentioned, the private on-prem cloud environment, right? Everybody in here is likely running either vSphere. Yes, vSphere, several of you. I know that's a swear word for Microsoft, that's okay. How many folks in here running Hyper-V? Several of you, yes. I like to ask that question because as the years go on and Hyper-V makes more and more advances, the amount of hands that go up whenever you ask Hyper-V continues to increase. So that's always good. But Veeam has kind of really been focused. Its core competency, being our backup and replication product, has been focused 100% on the private on-prem data center, being the #1 virtual machine backup. That's what we were brought to market to do back in 2006. However, the way that we've expanded out is by offering offerings through our cloud service provider program. So many of you folks are likely leveraging and taking advantage of something called the 3-2-1 rule. Anyone ever heard of that? Several of you folks are shaking your heads. If you don't, it's 3 copies of my data, 2 different types of media, 1 of those offsite. And the number one challenge, even whenever I was kind of the IT guy on your side of the digging the trench that you're working on, that was the number one challenge that we were faced with. How do we get our data, our backup data, even our production data, how do we get it offsite? How do we get it off premises? So what we work with here is managed service providers from around the world via what we call our Cloud Connect technology. So that allows those folks to offer backup as a service as well as disaster recovery as a service that are leveraging the Veeam technologies. Now that can be in their own data center, that can be in a colo that maybe they're renting off of another provider, or in some instances it's even Microsoft Azure. So we have several partners that are VCSP partners that their data center is in a public cloud provider, and that's how they're leveraging being able to offer their customers backup as a service. However, what we're continuing to see, and likely many of you are as well, is focusing on software as a service. So some of the core players there is like Salesforce.com or QuickBooks, for instance, online. Microsoft's offering for software as a service, or SaaS, is Office 365, which is the email and their core business productivity, Word, Excel, those types of things, right? So now we're actually going to talk to you today and give you a demo of the Office 365 capabilities that we have. And then last is the public cloud. So these are the 4 different areas that Veeam as a company focus, because likely many of you are doing either one of these or multiple of these. So you're either, chances are, or an organization isn't all public cloud. Chances are an organization isn't all private cloud, running everything in their data center. What we're seeing is an increased adoption of kind of this hybrid cloud strategy, meaning I have workloads that are running in my data center, but I also have workloads running in somebody else's data center as well, right? And that can, as I mentioned, be in a public cloud, software as a service, managed cloud provider. There's a lot of different ways. But the important piece to know is that Veeam, being a backup vendor, an availability company, we're able to fit into each one of these buckets, okay, and make things work seamlessly. And that's ultimately the vision and kind of where the company is going as a whole. And hopefully after you see the demo here in a few minutes, you'll have an understanding of how we plug into each one of these different areas. Does that make sense for everybody? Cool. So the core products, and this is really what I'm going to focus on initially, is backup and replication. So for those of you folks that raised your hand that are current Veeam customers, version 9.5 is the latest release. And this came out just short of the new year in late 2016. And one of the most popular questions, because Veeam loves to get out there and stand from the rooftop saying, oh, the next version's coming, right? We always like to talk about the future. And one of the most common questions that we get, just like any other software vendor, is, when's it coming? When's it coming? And it was a really difficult question to answer for us because 9.5 had so many features that are solely dependent upon Windows Server 2016. And this isn't just checkbox support for Windows Server 2016. You'll see here in the course of the next few minutes that it's really deep integration with that. So some of the key different areas here is being able to actually install the Veeam services on Windows Server 2016, okay? Having full support for Hyper-V 2016. Some of the new things that it introduces with resilient change tracking, which is their native change block tracking, the REFS, resilient file system, that's kind of the recommended file system of the future for Microsoft. And then even adding additional support for really cool things like Nano Server. Anyone here heard of Nano Server? Several of you? Yeah, if you've attended, Ben did a session just the other day. And then in previous Ignites, Jeffrey Snover, who's one of the kind of senior folks at Microsoft, he loves to talk about Nano. Storage Spaces Direct, which is Microsoft's hyper-converged offering. We fully plug into there, as well as all the latest iterations of the Microsoft 2016 enterprise apps. So like SQL Server 2016, SharePoint 2016, Active Directory, Exchange, the whole gamut. We, as an organization, from a backup perspective, fully support. So what does that mean, all right? The first one being here, as I mentioned, regardless if you're running VMware or Hyper-V in this instance, you're able to install and protect virtual machines running on either one of those hypervisor platforms with Veeam, okay? The second piece of this being able to protect virtual machines that are running Windows Server 2016. And that's with full application-aware image processing, so we're able to quiesce VSS inside of the guest operating system to take an application-consistent backup. So if it's Exchange, SQL Server, SharePoint, things like that, where it actually needs to be placed in an application-consistent backup to get a good backup, truncate transaction logs afterwards, we're fully able to do that. And probably one of my favorite, coolest features of Windows Server 2016 is PowerShell Direct. Does anyone know what PowerShell Direct is? Several of you are shaking your heads. Yeah, this guy here's raising his hand. He knows what it is. But that allows you to actually communicate with a guest operating system with absolutely zero network connectivity. So we actually communicate with a virtual machine via the VM bus on the Hyper-V host, okay? So a machine, say for instance, can be in a DMZ environment that has absolutely zero connectivity with the management infrastructure. We're still able to interact inside of that guest operating system using PowerShell Direct, okay? And I'll show you, I have a couple of screenshots here in a second to show you what that. So the other kind of really cool thing is resilient change tracking. So for years, Microsoft would get knocked for not having any sort of native change block tracking. And that allows backup vendors like us to take really fast incremental backups. I don't want to take a full backup every time. I only want to capture the blocks of data that have changed since the previous backup. So the way that we would do that, and the way that we would have to do that, is via this thing right here called a filter driver. We would have to inject a piece of software inside of each of your Hyper-V hosts to capture the blocks of data that have changed. Well, that's no longer required in Hyper-V 2016 because they're providing native change block tracking capabilities. And it's RCT. If you go out and Google, I actually have done a blog on my personal site about this. And it's resilient change tracking. It's based on log truncation, replaying logs so that it's extremely resilient. So that if there ever was, say for instance, an unnecessary VM outage or a power outage to your host, your change block tracking data isn't lost. It's more resilient. And boom, nice little animation there. So you can see here that this networkless backup that I was talking about, and over here on the left-hand side, the network card is completely disconnected off of my virtual machine. I'm still able to quiesce VSS inside of the guest operating system and do indexing of the guest OS, even without the NIC card being present and being completely off the network here. And you can see it'll actually fail over. Initially, it'll try to connect via the NIC, and then it'll fail over and leverage PowerShell Direct inside of the guest operating system. Pretty cool. One other thing that we've added, anybody in here using Azure? Everybody should be using Azure. So one of the things that we're now able to do, and this is based on customer demand and requests that we've heard in the field, is being able to perform direct recoveries. So I have an on-prem environment. I'm backing up my VMware. I'm backing up my Hyper-V virtual machines. I'm backing up Windows. I'm backing up Linux. We're actually able now to add your Azure subscription into the Veeam console and perform direct restores out to your Microsoft Azure subscription. So you can say, hey, I want to restore this virtual machine. You can see here I can choose my virtual machine size, my storage account, my resource group, my virtual network. So whenever it comes online and is powered on inside of my Azure subscription, it's able to communicate and work with other components inside of Azure, right? The interesting piece of this is if you have Veeam installed, say you have it installed inside of Azure, and you want to do a direct restore inside of Azure, the traffic flow never actually leaves. So you can see here, I was choosing East US was my data center here. If my application, my Veeam application is in East US, and I'm doing a restore to East US, it never actually leaves the East US data center. So it's a lot faster than if I was to stream it out from on-prem out to the Azure data center. This is all great, right? It's really fantastic stuff, but what about kind of the next iteration? I have all this backup data. Where am I going to store it? Well, you need to have storage for that. And we feel that there's a lot of different kind of challenges that folks are faced with whenever they're trying to choose and architect kind of what is my ideal backup storage. And there's a lot of questions that you should, or you're likely asking yourself. The first one being here, how scalable is it? What type of performance am I going to get? Performance is important because that determines how fast can I back up or how frequently can I back up, otherwise known as RPO or recovery point objective. Excuse me. Or down here, The second piece, probably more important than RPO, is RTO, or recovery time objective. How fast can I actually do a restore if I actually have to bring things back up when it goes bump in the night? Cost, performance and costs are related together. So, Reed can come to me and say, hey, you know what? We need to be able to bring things back up almost instantaneously. I say, well, you know what, Reed? That means we need to go out and buy an SSD all-flash array. There's a cost associated with that recovery time objective. So whenever you're thinking about backup storage, and this is regardless of what product you're utilizing, this is kind of just industry best practices that I'm sharing with you folks, is that kind of the balance between performance and cost is going to vary from environment to environment based on what you're trying to achieve, what your business needs and business demands. The two over here, integrity and reliability. Most often, I kind of think that these components get overlooked by folks because you traditionally get buried into the, well, how much does it cost component, because that's whenever you're talking to a C executive or your manager or director and you're trying to say, hey, I want to go and get this thing that's like uber scalable and it's really got all this resiliency built into it. And he's like, well, you know what? How much does it cost? That always is a very key determining factor. So you definitely don't want to look over these two core categories. And how are we doing this? So inside of Veeam 9.5, as well as Windows Server 2016, Microsoft has really made a lot of improvements to one of their key file systems. It's called the Resilient File System, or REFS. Anyone ever heard of REFS? Yeah? It was first introduced into Windows Server back in Windows Server 2012. It was REFS version 1.0. They've changed it, got better in 2012 R2, but it still had a lot of challenges. However, with Windows Server 2016, it's at version 3.1, REFS 3.1. So if you actually go out and look at the file system itself in the GA version of Server 2016, it's version 3.1. But with this, we as an organization at Veeam are able to take advantages, of a native API that they have there inside of the file system. It's called the block clone API. And what that's going to allow us, whenever we're writing backup files to a REFS file repository, since we're leveraging this block clone API, whenever I do synthetic backups, grandfather, father, son retention policy, or reverse incremental backups, they're literally instantaneous. Because the blocks of data are already on disk, all we're going to do is say, hey, block clone API, point metadata to this block that already exists. So whenever I'm doing synthetic operations, I'll show you here in a demo and a screenshot here in a second, they're literally instantaneous. But the cool part of it is, yes, it saves time, but also saves space because it is literally just metadata updates. So if I had 5 terabyte active full backup occur, increments all through the week, and that synthetic backup goes to kick off on Saturday, it's not going to take up any additional space because we're referencing the blocks of data that are already on disk utilizing this API. For me, this is absolutely 100% hands down the best feature inside of Veeam today because it's the most game-changing. Because REFS is included in every version of Windows Server, all the way down from Hyper-V Free Edition to Data Center. So you have it at your fingertips. There's no additional cost. And you're going to get space savings by leveraging this that would rival that of a deduplication storage appliance. So if I have a large set of restore points, based on this API and the block, just the metadata updates that we're performing, you're going to see a lot of space efficiencies. Kind of some call-outs, however. Now this is based, since the product's gone out and we've worked with Microsoft, some key recommendations that we have. So whenever you actually go into computer management, disk manager to format with the REFS file system, it's not default. You actually have to go in the drop-down here. NTFS is still the default. You have to change it from NTFS to REFS, and then you want to change the block size to 64K. There have been known issues, Microsoft is well aware of this, of whenever you have larger sets of data, actually blue screening servers. So you want to make sure that you choose that 64K block allocation. So if I look at kind of what does this actually look like, kind of give you an example. And as I mentioned, I do have some real-life examples to show you. Here I have my backup repository. Now this is legacy. This is formatted with NTFS. All right? On Saturday, I have a full backup, active full. I'm actually going to go out and pull data from my production Hyper-V environment, my production vSphere environment. You can see here my repository is now 30% capacity. Now, if I fast forward through the week, you can see my incremental backups just going up 10% because I'm only backing up the blocks of data that have changed since the previous backup. Now, whenever the synthetic backup occurs, you'll see here my repository space is going up 80%, 90% here in a second. So there's two things that I want to call out here. It's expensive, okay? It's expensive from an I/O perspective because not only do we have to read in all of these previous changes from the week, right? So I actually have to go out, and there's one I/O to read the data, the incrementals that are there, and then there's another I/O to read the data from my Hyper-V or my VMware Hyper-V environment, and then there's another I/O to write it, okay? So there's actually 3 I/Os occurring. And if this is backup storage, chances are that that's going to cause performance implications to my backup disk, right? The other piece of it is expensive from a capacity. I'm at 90% right now. Whenever we're leveraging the REFS file system, nothing changes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Nothing changes there. Where it really starts to change is over here. My 60% is still 60% because we are literally just utilizing an API that's native to the file system itself to update. It actually takes longer for us to update the metadata inside of our software than it does for the REFS file system to do its magic under the covers. So this is a real test that I've personally done in my lab environment. So here you can see that I was backing up around 2 terabytes worth of data. I had like 75 virtual machines I was backing up. And down here, my synthetic backup was going for 5 hours and 31 minutes. And what really upset me was it was at 94%. 94% done, and my repository ran out of space. I apparently didn't do enough capacity planning, but that was a little frustrating for me. But anyhow, it was almost done. It got 5 hours and 31 minutes before it went belly up. With same set of backups, literally the only thing I changed was the repository is Server 2016 with REFS, okay? 5 hours and 31 minutes, 29 minutes and 4 seconds. So it's literally, if you're not looking at this, you should be, is the point that I'm trying to make. And this is something that we at Veeam are talking a lot about because we thoroughly believe that this is a game-changing feature for customers, partners, Microsoft. We all are very excited about this, and if you can't tell, it's something I'm pretty passionate. So I like it a lot. And one of our product management folks, Anton Gostev, he's actually done a YouTube session. So some of the stuff that I talked about here is in it, but there's a lot more deep detail. If this is something that you're interested in, take a look at this deck afterwards, because you'll get access to this via Channel 9, and you can go out there and watch that video too. So the second area is interesting, Veeam agents, right? Veeam used to stand from the rooftop telling folks how agents are bad, you don't want to install agents, right? Anyone ever remember that? Agentless. We used to talk about Veeam as an agentless solution. Well, guess what? Now we have an agent. Because it makes sense. And let me tell you why it makes sense. It makes sense for certain use cases. The number one use case that it makes sense is physical, right? So we are now able to protect physical workloads. Those physical workloads can either be server-based, so Windows Server, or workstation. So endpoints running Windows 10, laptops, Windows 7 laptops, things of that nature. However, where it still continues to absolutely not make sense is inside of a virtualized environment, right? So you do not want to install any sort of agent inside of a virtual machine, right? Only for physical, but then also inside of cloud environments as well. So AWS or Azure virtual machines instances, that's really kind of the future for us, and working with these individual cloud partners to back up and protect the data inside of there. Yes, question. So the question was, if you have BitLocker or you're doing any type of guest file system, encryption, virtual machine encryption, yeah, you would definitely need to have an agent inside of there if you're doing BitLocker, for instance, or if you're leveraging, like, say, for instance, shielded virtual machines within Server 2016, or VMware has a technology where they can now encrypt virtual machines as well. So the agents, as I mentioned, built for on-prem, servers, workstations, desktops, laptops, endpoints, roaming users. You'll see something really cool there, as well as cloud-based instances. There's an agent we have for Linux, and there's also an agent that we have for Windows too. And there's a lot of really cool features. I'm not going to go through here. As I said, you guys can get access to this, and this is something I'm going to demo for you. The coolest one that I will, however, call out here, two of them actually, is the direct restore to Microsoft Azure. So I can actually take, this is something that I did. I have a Surface Pro at home. I was able to back up my Surface Pro 3 using our agent product and do an instant restore that out to my Microsoft Azure subscription, which is really cool because I can take a physical device and I can restore that out to an Azure virtual machine. I thought that was pretty cool. The second one here is instant recovery to a Hyper-V VM. So I can have a physical server, I can have a Surface, I can have a virtual machine that was on another cloud platform, for instance, back that up on-prem or to another cloud provider, a VCSP partner, and perform an instant recovery of that agent-based backup. As I mentioned, it can be a physical machine instantly to a Hyper-V virtual machine. Pretty cool. So the agent for Linux, we support a whole gamut of Linux distributions. I will absolutely 100% admit openly to the public, I'm not a Linux guy, so don't ask me really deep technical Linux questions, but we support CentOS, Ubuntu, Debian, and pretty much all the major kind of Linux distributions that fall underneath those umbrellas. You can see here that there's a nice little UI that we've built, but then there's also a command line too, so if you wanted to kind of work with that inside of cron jobs and things of that nature to actually have it scheduled, you can do that too. And then you can see here, there's a whole list of different features. Enterprise level here, pre-freeze, post-thaw scripts for application processing. So if I had like a DB2 database running inside of my Linux virtual machine, we're able to inject pre-freeze and post-thaw. Quick fact for you, did you guys know that Linux is actually the #1 deployed workload inside of public cloud environments? Not Windows, imagine that. But I thought that was pretty cool. So that's great. I have all these agents, right? We've deployed them out. I'm protecting servers, desktops, endpoints, laptops, the whole 9 yards. How am I going to manage this stuff? Well, imagine that. We have you covered there too. So the way that our story for managing these individual agents that are out there is broken up into 3 kind of different areas or 3 buckets of customers. The first one being less than 10, the second one being more than 10, and then the last one here being more than 100, all right? So the one that we're initially going to talk about and focus in this section of the presentation is the guy that has more than 100 agents. However, as you'll see here in the demo, and I'm going to show you, the other folks here are able to leverage our product too. So the guy up here on the top that has less than 10 computers, right, probably okay with just installing and managing them manually. It's only 10 servers or 10 desktops or 10 laptops. Not too bad. The gentleman here in the middle, we have a remote configuration CLI. So you can actually install the product, export out all the settings to an XML file, and then you can import that into a whole list of other computers out there via group policy or via like config manager and actually pushing out the software. The one down here, he needs something a little bit more robust. And for that guy or gal, we've designed a product called the Veeam Availability Console, okay? This is able to do remote discovery of endpoints, desktop servers, laptops, and automatically deploy out the agent and create backup policies, all right? So that's for the large enterprise environment and the service provider, and has remote built-in billing capabilities, show back, charge back for the enterprise too. So, as I mentioned, 2 different personas that this product is focused on. The first one being the service provider, and the second one being the enterprise. Because whenever we go and talk with these 2 folks, the service provider and the enterprise, they share so many of the same challenges, right? It's just what you call it. The service provider, he likely has a main data center. It could be in Azure. It could be in his data center. But he's also got a whole list of different remote tenants that he's trying to manage, right? separated by this thing in the middle that's called the internet. The enterprise, a distributed enterprise that has multiple remote branch offices, a main headquarters, maybe multiple data centers worldwide, he has to be able to manage all these different devices. And then he also has roaming workforce as well that are pseudo-tenants, if you will. They're not tenants per se, they're not purchasing a service off of him. However, him being IT is offering, is acting like a service provider. So, whoops, too fast. The challenges that these guys are faced with, probably the most important one on here is the remote backup management and the alerting, as well as the show back and billing, and how fast can I add tenants, how fast can I provision, bring things online, and offer services like backup as a service. So you'll notice here that for service provider and enterprise, the story doesn't change very much. It's all based on our Cloud Connect technology. Out here, I have a cloud gateway, so it's able to communicate openly over the internet using one port 6180 and a TLS secure certificates connection to connect all these different remote devices. And I'm able to offer services to these folks. I can control them. I can start and stop and manage jobs remotely. I can export log files from different backup and replication installs that I might have sold into my customer account. So I'm able to offer backup as a service. I'm able to offer remote monitoring and management as a service for these tenants. Same story for the enterprise, right? Veeam Cloud Connect for the enterprise gets installed inside of your data center, and it's able to connect using Cloud Connect technology, port 6180, TLS internet connection, certificate connection, and I can manage all these individual devices, agents at each of those different sites, virtual machines at each of those different sites, right? And you'll see in the demo that I'm literally going to get here in a few minutes. It'll seem like I'm switching around a lot from environment to environment, and I actually did that for a purpose because I have workloads running in Azure. I have workloads running in AWS. I have workloads running inside of my on-prem data center that's back in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm able to work with it all together seamlessly, and you'll see that, promise. The last piece, and this is kind of one of the key buckets for us moving into the future, is talking about the software as a service, folks. And the number one that we've been requested is being able to back up and protect Office 365 data. The first play that we have there is 100% focused on email only. That's right now email only. So we're able to pull back your Office 365 email data back to on-prem. Does anyone know why this is important? It's important because there's a misconception. And for the two folks sitting here in the front that are Microsoft employees, you should hold your ears. Because people think that just because your data is in the cloud, that it's going to be available all the time. How many times have we heard from different public cloud providers that there are outages, right? Or I need to actually have control of this data. There's no native, really good backup tool that protects data inside of Office 365 or SharePoint, for instance. There's third-party products that offer this, and kind of where we're going with this is to start getting into those different areas. So we actually communicate out to your Office 365 subscription using native Exchange Web Services API, EWS API. So we'll actually communicate out to your Office 365 subscription, connect to it. You can go in and you can create backup jobs. You can select individual mailboxes you want to protect, or you can select all mailboxes depending on how big your subscription is, and you're able to pull that back, all that email data back on-prem, okay? So then you're able to do e-discovery. I can do all of the cool Veeam Explorer for Exchange restores that I'm able to do today with Exchange on-prem. If I have Exchange on-prem, I can restore out to Office 365. If I have Office 365, I can restore back to on-prem Exchange. Because what we see is most customers actually operate hybrid. They still have Exchange inside of their data center for a certain set of mailboxes, and they also run mailboxes inside of Office 365 as well. So we're able to protect inside of your data center, restore out to Office 365, kind of the migration story there. We're able to help there. And then also with being able to do, as I mentioned, e-discovery and restores for users' email data too. So whenever I go through there's a lot of different cool restore options that I have at my fingertips, like being able to export out to a PST file. Whenever you export it out to a PST file, we actually include inside of the PST a report that shows you what the search criteria was. So if I was ever under any sort of litigation and I wanted to actually export somebody's mailbox out and show, hey, this is the criteria that we use to search against this. This is the date. It's very formal, right? Very popular for the litigation purposes. I can restore out to a file. I can restore back out to an individual user's mailbox, an alternate user mailbox. There's a lot of flexibility that we're providing, and a lot of ease of use too. So, is that enough PowerPoint for you guys? It's enough for me. Yeah, for sure. So, as long as I did something right. So, this should look familiar to some of you guys. This is the backup and replication console. So I'm going to go through a couple of different scenarios with you guys and walk through the different talking points that I had. So we're going to first focus on here is my REFS story. So you can see here, hopefully, I've got an REFS repository, right? I just come under my backup and replication here. I can right-click, and I say Add Backup Repository. Now, whenever we enable, we notice that the file system of this repository is REFS. We automatically enable data integrity streams. This is something I didn't talk about. So the REFS file system has the capability to do block-level data corruption. So you'll actually go in the event viewer and you can see whether or not it's detected corrupt blocks of data against a file. So like a text document, for instance. It helps prevent against a problem that other file systems have called bit rot. So this REFS, being resilient file system, it'll automatically try to repair those corrupt blocks of data, right? If I have, like, say, for instance, a storage spaces direct cluster that has multiple nodes in it that I'm backing up to, it's able to use the parity bit from other nodes inside of the cluster to automatically repair the data. So the point being here is, whenever I was talking about the different points of a backup repository that you should look at: cost, performance, resilience, integrity, this REFS file system checks off all of those key requirements. Did you have a question, sir?
What are the storage implications of using multiple file systems to scale out?
Yeah. So the question was, what if you're using multiple file systems inside of a scale-out backup repository?
Correct.
What is the storage? The storage implication. So you're able to have a scale-out backup repository with multiple extents. So before I answer your question, a scale-out backup repository, if you're not using Veeam, it allows you to have multiple pieces of disk under a single namespace. So whenever I create a job, I point to this scale-out backup repository, and then you're able to have data locality rules or performance rules that say, I want my full backups to go to this extent. I want my incremental backups to go to this extent. Maybe it's a deduplication storage appliance, for instance. So to answer your question is, you're able to have this REFS repository be an extent inside of a scale-out backup repository.
Yeah, but what about if you're using multiple?
Multiple REFS?
Multiple file systems.
That's not a concern for, so you would just choose the data locality. So you would want to keep all of the restore points from that individual backup job on the same extent. So if I pivot the view over here to backup and replication, can everybody see this okay? Is it big enough? Yeah, looks good? Okay. So you can see here I have my backup job, right? Down here. Now this is one that is going to just a native NTFS file system. If we click on this here, we'll be able to see that my synthetic backup was successfully created. It took 53 minutes for this to occur. Small set of virtual machines, right? But it's doing a synthetic backup. Kind of the key piece here that I wanted to highlight is whenever I'm going to an REFS repository, you'll notice that this little, in brackets here, bracket, fast clone bracket in the center of the screen, that's how you know that we're leveraging the block clone API, okay? So where it took 53 minutes before, this one here is down to 2 minutes and 36 seconds. So it's very efficient, right? So there's a lot to be gained there. The second piece that I wanted to show you guys here is the agents. So this is the Veeam agent for Windows. You'll notice that this virtual machine in the name has EC2. This is actually an Amazon EC2 virtual machine that I have running. where I've installed the Veeam agent for Windows. Just so happens that I installed it manually, okay? This was initially the free edition because the agent for Windows as well as the agent for Linux comes in 3 different flavors. There's going to always be the free edition. Then there is the workstation version, and then there's the server version. So the difference between workstation and server is the application-aware image processing. So being able to do, why is the screen flickering? You're able to do like SQL file, or excuse me, that just totally made my brain stop for a second. You're able to do SQL log truncation, SQL log backups, Oracle log backups, transaction log replays. You can back those log files up. If this was like a server, in this instance here, I believe I just have, if we go about, we can see here that this one is running server version. However, you'll notice this fun little cloud with the checkbox, right? So imagine a use case. This fine young lady here in the front of the room, she has a Lenovo laptop. She travels a lot, I'd imagine, right? You travel a lot? You look like you travel a lot. She has the Veeam agent for Windows installed on her laptop, but she's away from her corporate network. She's completely disconnected, right? She's on an airplane, she's traveling, she's remote, but she still needs her backups to occur. On the laptop, we specify a backup cache, and we actually keep a metadata update of all your restore points on the laptop. So even though you're disconnected away from the corporate network, or the WAN connection completely goes down, it's still able to back up locally, store those restore points, and then whenever you plug back into the infrastructure, it'll automatically upload those to your Veeam backup and replication repository, or if it's a service provider, a VCSP partner utilizing Cloud Connect, it'll automatically upload to their Cloud Connect repository. So you're still able to be disconnected remote away from the network and still have get the recovery point objective that you need. So that's something that's available inside of the Workstation edition. Whenever you first, question. Excuse me. So the question was, if you're on a 3G or 4G connection, so if I have limited bandwidth, we utilize, inside of Windows, you can specify high latency connections. I forgot the name of it off the top of my head. Metered connection. Yeah, if you say metered connection, then it will not upload. Good question. So whenever you first install the product, right? So imagine that this was, a physical device. We ask you to create a piece of recovery media so that we can do bare metal recovery. So whenever you boot up, whenever you install it, we give you the option to create this recovery media on an ISO, for instance, that you could attach to like the DRAC or the ILO or the SIMC, depending on which physical server provider you have, so that you can do bare metal recovery. You don't have to worry about doing system state recovery. You boot up to this ISO that includes all the drivers. So if I have a different RAID card, a different storage controller, a different network interface card, that ISO image contains all those drivers. And then you're able to point out to where your restore points are, whether that be a backup and replication repository or a Cloud Connect repository, and do bare metal recovery. Works great. So you'll notice here that this one says that my application is being managed by my system administrator. So you might be wondering why that's there, and I'll get to that in a second here. It's made possible by this fun little agent that I have here. So during the PowerPoint presentation portion of the chat, I talked about this Veeam availability console, okay? So what we are pushing out, or give you the ability to download manually and install, is this VAC agent, the Veeam Availability Console agent. This individual piece of software here allows discovery to occur, right? So if I install this inside of an on-prem data center on my backup and replication server, for instance, or at a service provider, this is what will actually go out and query your local infrastructure, based on Active Directory, network discovery, or even a list of computers inside of a CSV document too. And this is what the availability console looks like. Oh, it needs to refresh. password. My license key is going to expire. I need to take care of that. So this is actually a virtual machine that I have running outside in Microsoft Azure. So you can see here my Azure subscription, I've got a whole list of different machines running. This one down on the bottom, the VMS machine. Earlier I mentioned my Surface Pro that I backed up using the agent and did a recovery out to Microsoft Azure. That's actually my Surface Pro 3 that I have running outside in my Azure virtual machine. But you can see here that I have my VAC virtual machine running out inside of Microsoft Azure. So with this, I'm able to remotely monitor and manage multiple instances of backup and replication. This is essentially my service provider. So I'm either a true service provider or I'm an enterprise that is managing multiple instances of Veeam, or even a single instance, right? Whenever I go into my backup and replication console here, backup infrastructure, I go under service providers. You can see here that whenever I add in this service provider, there's this fun little checkbox down here that says allow this Veeam backup and replication install to be managed by the service provider. Whenever you check off that checkbox, it'll automatically push down that VAC agent to this instance of Veeam inside of your data center, okay? So if we pivot back over here, and I go under backup jobs. Now I've added that tenant in here. I have visibility into every single one of his backup jobs that is running inside of his data center. But I also have this fun view here of backup agents. And up here, I can switch the view between tenants. So I have multiple tenants that I'm managing, right? So I have my home account that I have, and then I also have, this SSA Veeam one is my data center that we have in Columbus, Ohio. So we're able to manage all of these workstations where we've pushed out the agent. We can start and stop, as I mentioned, jobs. We can export the log files out, download the logs. How does this happen? It happens via this discovery that we create. So if we come under here, we edit the settings of my discovery. How are we on time? We got 28 more minutes. Perfect. Give it a name, choose which machine I actually want to do the discovery. The discovery method, I just want to highlight this out for you guys. So I'm actually doing across an entire organizational unit that I have inside of my on-prem Active Directory environment, right? So I can come in here and I can say, I only want to look at this specific OU. So every time a virtual machine or a physical machine gets added to this OU, my discovery is scheduled to run every day. It's going to automatically get discovered. And then you can have a schedule that will push out the agent. So as computers get discovered, it's automatically going to push out the Veeam agent for Windows. Does that make sense? And then here's where we see the list of all the discovered computers. What's the agent status? What backup policy do I have assigned to it? You can create backup policies based on individual tenants. You can create global policies, for instance. The point being is you're able to remotely monitor and manage all of these Veeam agent for Windows that you have all across any environment. Now, to answer that question a few seconds ago where it says this application is managed by your administrator, you'll know here if I go under configuration backup and or config backup, and I actually try to make a change, it's going to be completely grayed out. So even being an administrator logged in as a domain admin or local administrator on this machine, I can't make any changes whatsoever because it's being 100% controlled by either my enterprise system administrator or my service provider. So if you wanted to make a change, let's cancel out of here. This is this virtual machine right here. Just come under Manage Computer Mode, switch to full admin access. And as soon as I switch over to here, you notice it's gone, okay? It asked me to create recovery media because I never created my recovery media. So if I come in here, config backup, it's going to be completely unlocked. Yeah, so now I can make changes if I wanted to make changes, right? Does that make sense to everybody? And it's communicating with this instance via that Veeam Availability Console agent that I talked about. Repeat the question?
So you just unmanage it. So you go make changes, and if you go and remanage it again, does it change it made?
It's still being managed. It's just the UI is unlocked. So if somebody did go in here and make changes again, we're not going to reapply. You would have to go in and switch the policy and then switch it back again. But just to highlight something for you here is that if I wasn't logged in as an administrator, if I was just logged in as Joe user, imagine the workstation use case that I explained. If I tried to launch the control panel here, it would try to prompt me for credentials because I'm a regular user and I don't have any reason whatsoever to be in here, right? So what does this look like from a back end? So this, again, is a virtual machine that I have running out in Azure. It's Windows Server 2016. I manually installed backup and replication on here. He's operating as a service provider. We've given endpoints the ability to back up here. So if I right-click on my repository, configure agent permissions, this is allowing all of the agents that I'm managing to use him as a backup repository target, okay? The other thing that I want to highlight here is, I believe it's under repository, advanced. Anyways, I was going to show you that, I forget which tab it's under to be completely honest, but you can force this repository to encrypt all the backups that come to it as well. So either a service provider can offer the encryption and force backups that are coming in to be automatically encrypted, or a tenant themselves can configure encryption as well. So if I go over to this guy here, configure backup, this will come back up in a second. We can specify an encryption key, right? Why? Encryption key is very, very, very important, okay? It's important for two different reasons. If I'm a tenant backing up to a service provider, I do not want that service provider to be able to restore my stuff, okay? I want to be, me being the tenant, I want to control that encryption key. Make sense? Or if I'm an enterprise, it's still just generally best practice to encrypt, to encrypt your backups. So that way if somebody, decides to steal them or take them someplace else where they shouldn't be, you want to make sure that you're secure, because whenever I go to do a recovery, as you'll see here just in a second, I believe it's under credentials, backup resources. Yeah, advanced storage. You're able to come down here and set your encryption key. The nice part of this, though, whenever you change your encryption key, it'll automatically prompt you to recreate your recovery media as well, because that encryption key is stored in the recovery media. Because if I steal my restore points and I have the recovery media, now I can restore everything. So that encryption key is baked into the recovery media, so whenever you boot it up, it'll challenge you and say, you need to decrypt this in order to be able to do a restore. So cancel out here. So if I switch over to here, this is that virtual machine on my repository. If we zoom in here and make it a little bit bigger for you. So this is the scenario where, I call my service provider, I call my enterprise admin, the backup guy, and say, hey, I need to restore this, right? What's he going to do? If you come in here, just double click on the metadata file. It'll automatically launch the backup console. And the first thing that's going to happen here
From a restore or from a backup target or a backup vault perspective, can you use any SMB3 location?
Yeah, so the question was basically what type of backup storage do we support?
Right.
So we support pretty much any storage under the sun. So we have special integrations with Data Domain, HP Store once, Exagrid. We also have direct integration with the REFS file system. We have customers that utilize NFS as repositories. We have customers that leverage, JBOD, just a bunch of disk storage appliances on, like, say, for instance, Cisco 3260. The HP Apollo servers make great backup servers. They're purpose-built storage appliances, right? Where you would install Windows Server on top of it in the REFS file system, for instance, and you've got a smoking backup target. Especially the Cisco story, because now, anyone in here use UCS? Is UCS popular in Australia? Seems to be. The 3260, actually, you're able to connect that into your Fabric interconnects now, so you can get like 40 gigabyte backup speeds. It's really, really a good story to tell. So you can see here my backup console came up, and the first thing that I'm asked for is my recovery password to decrypt that backup. And whenever I type it in here, my super secret password, don't tell anybody. I can't tell you, it's super secret. Yeah, it comes up here and it's, okay, it decrypts it, and then I can start to do my restores. Really cool, right? Fun stuff. The nice part about this, traditionally, backup and replication has been an image-based backup, right? I go out and take a snapshot of a virtual machine stored in a file, no agent. It is exactly the same core. Even though there's an agent inside a physical machine or a cloud instance, it's still an image-based backup. These backup files are no different, right? They're no different than my Veeam backup files. That makes them very portable, meaning I can move them around from environment to environment. But whenever I go here to try and do restores, just going to move over here to the other on-prem environment, because under disk, I've got everything already imported in here. You'll see agents intermixing in with my other virtual machine backups, right? I can right-click on here. I can do my instant recovery to Hyper-V. I can do my direct restore out to Microsoft Azure. Did you have a question? I thought I saw a hand. No, okay. They're just backup files. They're very portable. I can move them around. It's utilizing all the same stuff. If you're using Veeam today, you're already familiar with using these restore capabilities. Does that make sense? Questions? We have 18 minutes left, and there's one last thing that I want to show you guys. But before I do pivot away from this, I just want to see if you guys have any questions. Does anybody? Yes? So the question was, whenever you're doing synthetic backups on REFS, that's great. What happens whenever another active full kicks off? That's essentially restarting the chain again. Okay, so that last synthetic backup, nothing changes with that synthetic backup. It's eventually going to fall off based on your retention policy that you have set, right? So if I'm keeping 60 days worth of backups, it will fall off based on the regular retention. So whenever...
So for a backup copy job, if you're using that for long retention,
Mm-hmm.
that should be NTFS with DDoS?
Good question. I mean, it's, half dozen one, six in the other. Really, there's pros and cons to all the approaches. We kind of feel that the way that folks should be looking is at this Windows Server 2016 and REFS. Microsoft has made a lot of advancements in Windows Server with the deduplication storage role. Right now, the dedupe role is not able to be applied to an REFS volume, just like you can't put REFS on the boot volume either. That's definitely something that the product team knows. So if I was a betting man, I would probably say that that's something that they're looking at changing in the future, is being able to put deduplication on an REFS volume. I think that's the most politically correct way to answer it. Encryption. How does encryption affect deduplication? You're not going to get any deduplication against an encrypted Veeam has native built-in compression and deduplication. It's not global deduplication by any means. It's based on job by job. So typically we see customers getting like 3-to-1 reduction by using our native dedupe. You had a question.
Can I move existing Veeam backups from an NTFS volume to REFS and take advantage of that right away, or do my backups have to be written natively to REFS?
No, so the question was, how do I migrate from NTFS to REFS and move my backup files? Unfortunately, it's a new file system, okay? So if you go into, Disk Manager, you have to format the volume. So what we see customers doing is just adding another, either a new server. So if it's a physical repository, get something brand new, install Windows Server on it, REFS, and then copy your backup files over, re-import them in, and then you have to either have a synthetic backup occur, a full backup occur before it'll start to take advantage of the REFS capabilities. There's no easy migrate, like an easy button, per se. Oh, this gentleman back here was, yes?
In terms of the PowerShell Direct, is that for everything that you can do via network, or is that only a specific class? Like I can say application availability, application.
Where image processing and guest file system indexing. So the question for those folks that didn't hear was, kind of to summarize, is where is PowerShell Direct able to be used? So it's able to be used during backup, during the application-aware image processing, as well as the guest file system indexing, so for Enterprise Manager as well, and then also on the restore side. So if I had a virtual machine that had no network connectivity or that DMZ use case, we would actually utilize PowerShell Direct to inject inside of the guest VM to restore files inside of it.
2016 for the VM and the host?
Yeah, so the host has to be at Windows Server 2016. In the virtual machine has to be at Windows Server 2016 as well. And also has to have the latest hardware version applied to your question. And then DD Boost. Yeah, so the question was with data domain. So we fully support and integrate with DD Boost. Correct. Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to switch over to the really quick here. So we've got 13 minutes to the Office 365 stuff. So this here is my Veeam backup from Microsoft Office 365. You can see here that I have two different subscriptions added. One is my personal subscription, and another one is a fictitious company that we own. So whenever I go out here, if I right-click, I can add my Office 365 subscription. You can get granular permissions, and it needs application impersonation, it needs view configuration, and view-only role inside of Office 365. Whenever I add that, I'm able to create backup jobs and say, so if we just disable this, I'll show you how you do that. If we go down here, right-click, I hit Edit. I'm able to protect either all mailboxes across my entire infrastructure, or I can get granular and say, I only want to back up the following mailboxes there. And then I hit Next, and I set an RPO, basically how frequently I want to back these up. You can have more than one job. So, say for instance, in our company, the CEO needs to have or wants to have his mailbox protected every hour because he's super important. He sends a lot of email. Or I could have just the general office worker that we're backing up their stuff every day, for instance. Okay? So you can have multiple jobs occur. And with that, we store these backup files out in a really unique format. It's called the JetBlue database format. For those folks that are really kind of geeky, that like to know this type of stuff, this is actually the same exact file format that Exchange itself stores its files in, as well as Active Directory too. So this is a fully supported Microsoft methodology for storing archives and large amounts of data. This is literally like a live active database, okay? You don't necessarily need to ever worry about this, but this is a local piece of storage that I have attached to my virtual machine in this instance, or it can say, for instance, be an external, and if I come under here to my options, I'm able to configure my location where I want my Office 365 archives to go. It can be like your D drive or your E drive, or it could be, whack my data domain, for instance, and we can back up directly there too. It is. Yeah, so the first backup's a full backup, right? Could take, depending on how many mailboxes you have, I've seen environments take some larger environments that we've been working with, upwards of, like 15,000 mailboxes, takes multiple days to do the first backup, which is kind of to be expected because there's, 50, up to 50, 60 gig per mailbox potentially. But kind of the cool part is whenever it comes down to, the recovery. So I just chose the latest restore point that I have. I can come in here, I can see all the individual mailboxes that I have. I can go into the mailbox, I can click on it. I can see here what was sent. Right here, I can see I sent my team test email. All I did was double click on it, validate, is this the correct email? Do I want to restore it? If you're using Veeam today to back up Exchange, this is the same exact tool that we use to back up on-prem Exchange. It's called Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Exchange. Nothing here has changed. You can export out to PST file. I can restore to an alternate location. Whenever you're doing that restore to option, you can choose my on-prem Exchange environment, so I can restore the entire mailbox back to on-prem Exchange, or I can have my on-prem Exchange restore out to my Microsoft Office 365 account where I've pre-created mailboxes. So I could have like Clint's mailbox, I could have Reed's mailbox, and then I could start to migrate the data out on a staged approach. So that's another use case where this tool really makes good sense. How many guys in here are utilizing Office 365? Several of you? Is this, being honest, is this something that you would think would be useful? It'd be great if we had like SharePoint and OneDrive, for instance, right? Does this kind of look interesting to you guys? Yeah? Cool.
Do you do role-based access control?
Not yet. This is, got to start somewhere, right? So some of the things that aren't available in here, there's no multi-tenancy. So if I was a VCSP, I can't offer like mailbox backup as a service. That sounds like a really intriguing conversation that folks could have, especially service providers, where I can offer Office 365 backup as a service. So that's something that we're potentially looking at adding in the future.
Can this sit on the same server as your backup and replication repository backup server?
So the question was, can you install this on the same server as your BNR server? Technically, yes. Should you? No. You should install a separate server. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? The cool part that I will show you is I have this installed in a virtual machine, and whenever I use, wrong way, backup and replication to protect it, and I go under restore application items, it knows that Exchange, like my Office 365 data is there. So it'll actually mount my Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Exchange. I can choose what restore point I want to go back to. So now I'm 3-2-1 rule, 3 copies of my data, 2 different types of media, 1 offsite. I can even do that for my Office 365 subscription too, right? I can back it up on-prem, and then I can even do backup copy job now with this virtual machine to another site or a colo or someplace else. So you're completely offering kind of that availability. So just kind of wrapping things up here. We've got just a few more minutes, 6 minutes left. So how do we complete the story? Hopefully I've done a really good job today at explaining kind of how Veeam is really working very, very closely with Microsoft to what we call architect, or what I call the ultimate backup architecture, or hybrid cloud availability, if you will, if you want to use the marketing buzzwords. But we're able to fit in and satisfy many of the requirements that you folks are being challenged with today, right? So hopefully you found this discussion to be very, very useful. Veeam loves to give away free stuff. So we have a whole bunch of different free tools. But one of the ones that I did want to highlight for you before we left for the day, is there any MVPs, V-experts in the room, those types of guys? I know, Daniel, you're an MVP. Anybody else? We actually run promotions and give away free NFR keys. So if you know an MVP or you know a V-expert, they can actually go out to the Veeam website and they can get free year NFR keys, pretty much of all of our software, including the Office 365 piece too. And the agents will be added here in the very near future. So you'll be able to try this stuff out in your environment. They made me put this on there. I realize it's really far away for you guys. New Orleans, Louisiana. It's even far from me. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so I have to get on an airplane to go there for a few hours. But if you're looking for different types of shows to go to outside of the traditional, VMworld or Ignite or, EMC World or those other things, we do have a show also. It's called Veeam On, and we kind of one of the things that's really cool about this one is Mark Rasinovich is coming, and he's going to be the keynote speaker. So me being an IT guy, a geek, he's like, oh, the sysinternals guy, he's coming to talk. So, yeah, Mark's coming. But if you're interested, head out to veeamon.com and
Hey, Clint, it's worth mentioning that if you can't make that, we're going to have a version on it.
they are. Yes, we are. That's right. Veeam on tour in Australia. End of July.
Most of the content will be there.
Yeah. Cool. Does anybody else have any questions? Don't clap just yet. Read. No, seriously. Does anybody else have any questions, though? One more. Q2. It is. First half of the year. And that is a fact. If you're interested in learning more about the console or the agents, if you go out and Google Tech Field Day 13, anyone in here heard of Tech Field Day? I just did a presentation there like 2 weeks ago at Tech Field Day and demoed in a lot more detail what I showed you guys here. So if you go out and check out techfieldday.com, you'll see the video if you're interested in learning more about it. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate your time.